Good morning to all of you and welcome at this experience we'll have together. Today we are connected with London. My name is Giovanni Casati. I am the enologist of the estate Gena Agricola. And today I'd like to have this experience with you, like the title says, go west from east. This is going to be a rather unusual, uncommon wine trip in northern Italy. We will go to great terroirs with a great enological tradition. And I would like to underline the word unusual out of the ordinary, because we will discover products, unusual products, and rare to and hard to come by in the Italian wine-making landscape. There is, however, a common thread. There is a fil rouge that connects all these places. I said great territories, great terroirs. So the terroirs, the territories, the soils, the vineyards, with stratification of soils and cultures that helps us make wine. And we enologists interpret this, and so interpret that, and we are also the custodians of this, and therefore we make conventional products, but we also try to be innovative and modern in line with consumers' tastes. And because it's true, it's nice to make great wines, but then people have to want to drink them, and so we have to interpret a great deal of attention to this aspect and have this sensitivity. So let's start from the first great region, the first great terroir. We are in Friuli. Friuli is a place with great white wines, and it's at the border with the Austria and other foreign countries. And since there is the border, we had already a lot of contaminations from because we have Slovenia on one side, and also therefore, we find a lot of varieties, indigenous and international varieties alike. And the winery I'm about to present is Torre Rosazza. We are in the eastern hills of Friuli. This is a beautiful villa that once was a fortified villa. So we are in the eastern hills of Friuli, right above the Collio area. It's protected from the Julian Alps to the east, and you can say it's pretty close to the Adriatic Sea. And actually, when the Bora wind blows, it gets very clear, and we can see the harbor of Grado. Torre Rosazza is inspired from the Rosazza Abbey, where monks were making wines and olive oil. This is a place of great traditions, and it's a place where the territory truly leaves a mark in the wines, because the presence of the so-called ponca is the distinctive characteristic of these wines, with this significant acidity which is present in both red and white wines. Ponca is this sedimentary rock made of layers of limestone and sand that becomes a sort of sponge, that retains water when the weather is hot. And therefore, this allows plants to mature and ripen well, also in very warm years. And this means to preserve acidity and freshness. And also another characteristic of the area here, they have 100 hectares, are the so-called ronchi. So we are above Udine, and ronchi are hills. In Piedmont they call it bricchi, and in Tuscany they call them poggi. So these terraces are and the poggio is the tip of these hills, and there is a nice temperature difference that preserves the flavors of these wines. And the first wine we are about to taste is the first unusual wine. Here we are. So we talk about Schioppetti Schioppettino. Schioppettino is a red berry variety, indigenous variety, that was almost extinct in the 1970s when an EU regulation obliged the producers only to plant varieties within the DOC appellation. Schioppettino was not part of the DOC appellation, and so was at risk of extinction because they kept planting Cabernet Sauvignon. And actually they were heroes. Also Walter Filippucci, our enologist in those days, fought this battle, and finally Schioppettino was included in this project, and this is the acidity is moderate acidity in these grapes. I say it's uncommon because today we will taste it as a metodo classico, so a champenoise method. So it's a white spumante made with the classic method, metodo classico. In 2007 we started to make the spumante out of this variety because we think that it has some notes similar to Pinot Nero because it has this nice scent of forest fruits with spicy notes. And today we will taste 2018, disgorged in 2021. It's still a fresh product that still requires to be aged in the bottle. It was kept 24 months on the lees, and also the Riserva will be released next year after 36 months. This is a challenge for us, but this is something that we have done to be innovative and to suit the tastes of consumers. As you can tell from the color, it's intense straw yellow because of the 24 months on the lees, and also because it comes from red berry grapes, even though it's vinified in white. And generally, red grapes always have a plus and give a plus to the base wine compared to the white berry grapes that give only primary aromas, whereas red berry grapes give, yes, primary aromas, but different ones that then when there is bottle fermentation, they make the wine more complex. As you can see, the perlage is pretty nice. It's very fine and dense. And on the nose, it's fresh but complex. And it immediately makes you want to drink it. It's easy to drink. There are notes of small fruits, berries, with some whiffs of clove. All is delicate in this wine. None of these nuances, none of these notes is overpowering. And on the palate is very full, so it doesn't have the fatness of a spumante that was kept 36 months on the lees, but it is certainly nice, lingering, persistent, and I think it can be beautiful for aperitif, but also for an entire meal. And in any case, you have to pair it with dishes which are, pretty strong to blend with the intensity of this wine. And I'd like to clarify that this is called Blanca de Neri. This is the dialect for white wine from black grapes. And it's unique, definitely, in the Italian wine making landscape. It's the only Schioppettino vinified as a spumante with the champenoise method, the metodo classico. And I would like to add something to what I've said. In the 70s, this wine was at risk of extinction, and as it was replaced by Cabernet Sauvignon. But now they are eradicating, uprooting Cabernet Sauvignon, and we are planting Cabernet and Scopettino. So we are very proud of what we have done. So now we move over towards a very classical wine. Here we are. Here we have our pupitre of these Blanc de Noir that are kept in the cellars, in the underground cellars of the winery. This is the Grande Classico, the great classical wine. The Pinot Gris, that is one of our best sellers. Pinot Gris is probably the most widely sold wine across the world. So Pinot Grigio, Pinot Gris, is a natural mutation from Pinot Noir towards Pinot Blanc, and you can see the nice vines, 25-year-old vines, and also look at the color of the skin. It's not red, it's not orange, it has these purplish highlights. And we also have the version which is called Ramata, that is to say purplish. So the Pinot Gris is our flagship wine, our pride and joy. We truly believe that this is our top wine, also because we have been awarded many prizes also abroad with these wines. And we decided to do more. So in addition to offering the usual quality, we wanted to enhance even more this wine and give it a longer aging potential. Because, you know, when you want to have a Pinot Gris vinified in white, we do soft pressing of the grapes, not to extract color from the grapes. And so the grapes are harvested a little earlier, and so aromas are not completely developed yet. And then we give up on the aromatic component generally. But we developed a new technology based on the use of carbon dioxide and cold, so that we can macerate for a couple of hours the grapes in a saturated environment with no active enzymes, no oxygen, so as to extract the entire aromatic profile without extracting color. Then it is pressed, soft pressed, and so again not to extract color, and then it is kept in stainless steel vats. So Pinot Gris, the color is straw yellow but pale this time, tends to green, it's greenish, and it has some highlights. Today the light helps us. It has almost grayish highlights. And on the nose it's very complex, and please just wait a moment, let it open, because this is a selection from Uphill, the higher altitude Ronchi. This is a 2020, the year released, the vintage released this year, but this is the base wine, but we also make the Riserva wine, as I said. On the nose, we have notes of apple and William pear that then also leave some room for exotic flavors. So these exotic flavors, exotic fruit flavors, is results from this maceration of the skins. And on the palate, it has a nice acidity, freshness, but also a good structure that is persistent with this sapidity that is very lingering, very long on the palate. And this pairs beautifully with food. And it's an acidity that doesn't make you salivate, but it's a nice acidity that makes you want more. Another sip. So this slightly bitterish finish is because we have made this wine for aging. So this acidity will allow this wine to age well. So we will move from the apple, we will lose probably the exotic flavors, but we will certainly have a pear that will go from the William pear to the Decana pear, which is more ripened and also fattier, more opulent. Then last wine from Torre Rosazza, I'm very proud of, because we are truly working hard on this, which is Friulano. Friulano, also known until 2008, it was called the Tokai. Well, Tokai was one of the most sold wines abroad. It was the classical white wine drunk in osterie in Italy. Then when we lost the battle with Hungary, and now we are trying to fight the same battle with Slovenia, and Tokai, so they in Hungary is made completely different from our Tokai, so from our Friulano. So we managed to give it a new life. So we called it Friulano in Friuli and Thai in Veneto. And over the last few years, we've decided to continue our research, our work, to rediscover this variety. As you can see, it's truly beautiful. Look at the grapes, the bunches. They make you feel like wanting some berries because it's a loose bunch. This is a picture of from the upper parts of the ronchi. And so when you eat the berries, so at the moment you don't perceive anything, but you have also some sense in the nose, or that you will perceive also on the palate. When the Friulano is mature, after 2-3 days it can completely lose its acidity. So it's very complicated to make, and therefore the enologist has to find the right timing to vinify it. So this means that the alcohol content may not be the desirable one. For instance, we will be slightly low. For instance, 2020 was a good vintage, and we had both nice alcohol content and acidity. And also here we have used soft pressing, the cold technology. And the color is a nice straw yellow, slightly pale, and it's exciting on the nose compared to the classical Pinot Gris. On the nose, you feel like waiting for its evolution. Because at the beginning we have this note of pear with jasmine, scents. So herbaceous notes. And if you wait a few seconds, if you let it warm up a little bit in the glass, you can certainly perceive the incense note, the scent of incense, which is typical of Friulano. And typically, when the wine then is aged, this will turn into notes of saffron. And on the palate, it is truly a great satisfaction because it's ready, fresh. 2020 vintage. It's not unbalanced. None of its components are out of place. It's more fresh than the other Pinot Grigio, and so you can pair it also with more fattier dishes. For instance, yesterday I had it with mushroom risotto, so risotto ai funghi. Or also cheeses, fresh and fat, and hard cheeses, ripened cheeses too. So it has this final note, this finish on the palate of bitter almond that gives you this sort of bitterish aftertaste that is typical of almonds. That is the evidence that this is a true Friulano. And now, it's when we talk about people in Friuli always have this bitterish finish. They are hard to conquer. So they give you satisfaction, but not until the very end, because then this bitterish finish makes you want more and makes you want to discover even in greater depth this territory. We got an award with the Tre Bicchieri, the 3 glasses of Gambero Rosso, and it's the second year we have this award. And so it means that all the hard work we've made to rediscover this variety is starting to bear fruit. Very well. Let's continue our journey towards west, and we go to Veneto and we go to Valpolicella. Valpolicella with Costa Arente. And here again, we can say this is an unusual Valpolicella. Why? Well, because as you can read on the screen, we are in Val Pantena. So this is a winery, here it is, and the other day I was saying that the beauty about my job is to work in these beautiful places. We as enologists were very lucky because we make a product that gives a lot of pleasure and conviviality, and so it's also beautiful to work in these gorgeous places. Also because I have never ever tasted so a good wine that is made in ugly places. Generally, good wines come from nice places, beautiful places. But good wine is now made mainly. I mean, you can make excellent wines. If you have these beautiful places. So Costa Arente is in Val Pantena. Please remember this picture. If you like, I can show you it later again. So this is Val Pantena. Here it is. And if you it is a limestone terrace that from the north goes down to Verona and starts with Lake Garda and ends right before the province of Vicenza. We have Valpolicella Classica with the 3 historical valleys, Fumare, Marano, and Nagrar, then Val Pantena, which is narrow, that separates Valpolicella Classica from the so-called Valpolicella Allargata on the other side. Why do I say it's unusual territory? Because it's a narrow valley, short valley, that was rediscovered for winemaking only in the last 20 years. So after the Second World War, they started to trade with marble. There are quite a few quarries, but in Val Pantena, in Grezzana, there is also the Bertani winery that is a very important winery for Amarone. They invented Amarone thanks to the Bertani brothers who studied with Professor Guyot, and they started the Guyot training system in Guyot. So this is a nice terrace overlooking Verona, 12 minutes drive from Verona, and it is made of biancone, which is this white limestone, which is different from the other marble that is in other vineyards, that is red, and the red marble is very hard, whereas this white limestone is much softer. 17 hectares all around the winery, so with the winery in the middle. So the cellar, the winery is in the middle, and we also have the hospitality area. And so the wines we're about to taste are Ripasso and Amarone. Ripasso 2018 and Amarone 2016. This is the first Amarone of this winery, because this winery was recovered, it was abandoned, and then it was refurbished. In Val Pantena, since it's a narrow and short valley, there is a very early sunset, and there are strong winds, especially northern, southern winds, especially at night time. And also, here it is a picture, and we use this training system which is called the Pergola Veronese. It was abandoned because it didn't allow us to have a lot of color and a lot of color. So, and I'm telling you these technical things because with climate change, the pergola training system is coming back under the limelight to make good quality wine, because we have this canopy of leaves that protects bunches from the sun, so that the bunches can grow at 1.80 meter and is not affected by humidity, and is protected from the sun. And then we have to remember that the vine is Leone, and in this way, with this pergola, the vine can extend its vegetative cycle. For instance, in this case, this is Corvinone, and so with this cycle, life cycle, it gives its best expression. As far as Amarone is concerned, I would like to say, especially for our guests in London, well, let's say that the Ripasso is the son of Amarone, or better, the stepson of Amarone. And we have two harvests, sorry. The first one is beginning of September, and like this year, it was the usual time. So we hand harvest the grapes that are put on the mat or on the trays, and then they are not dried, but we keep them resting in this fruttaio for 3 months. And thanks to the natural ventilation from the Lessini Mountains and the modern technologies for drying these grapes, it will so the grapes will lose 30 to 45% of the weight. So it will have more sugar, flavors, and malic acid is degraded naturally by cells through cell breathing, and therefore acidity of these grapes will not be very high. So ready to be vinified in red. So then we wait for 2-3 weeks, and so these are the trays where the grapes are kept. After 2 weeks, we will harvest Valpolicella Superiore, so with more than 12.5 degrees, and we will obtain a fresh vintage wine. So end of October, beginning of November, we'll have our grapes resting, and the new Valpolicella, which is already ready. Then after 4 or 5 months, depending on the season, depending on the goal, over the last last few years, we were harvesting end of August, and this meant, for the joy of the enologists, then to vinify at Christmas. And in January, we'll have the new Amarone.
And I'd like to remind everyone that it is a processed wine, a method wine, obtained from dried grapes, not a regular wine. It's a unique wine, a one-off. The only other one that is similar to Amarone is a Sforzato from Valtellina. And since we're in Milan, I think you understand what I mean. But it's made with Nebbiolo grapes, Chiavenasca. When we draw off the Amarone, then we still have the skins with the yeast still in activity despite the 16 to 17% alcohol. And so here the winemakers have been ingenious because they thought of taking the year's wine and pass it again on the Amarone grapes. So the Valpolicella, which is naturally scented with notes of berries, it will gain some alcohol because Amarone is 16 to 17%, Valpolicella is 13%, the Ripasso is 14.5%. Plus, it will absorb all the flavors of the Amarone. The Ripasso is really the wine that guides the market for Amarone. As we shall taste it, Amarone, it is a wine that, as I like to say, you don't have enough senses to really perceive it and get everything that's in it. I'm not multitasking, so to fully understand Amarone and taste Amarone, I will have to at least stop talking because I can't do several things at the same time with such a complex wine. Okay, we'll continue with the. We'll begin with the Valpolicella Ripasso, which is passed, Valpolicella wine passed on the Amarone skins. And it has this elegance, this incredible freshness. Now with a similar structure, with a similar body, the Valpolicella wines are much fresher and easier to drink than others. Now, the color is a light ruby red. The grapes are Corvina, Corvinone, and Rondinella, occasionally Molinara and Oseleta. And up to 10 international grape varieties are permitted. But the characteristic that I'd like you to bear in mind when you taste the Valpolicella Ripasso or an Amarone is the pale red. To be a real Valpolicella, when you put your finger below the bowl of your glass, if you can see it, then it's real Amarone, real Ripasso. Because the Corvina is a rustic Pinot Noir and has a very low level of anthocyanins, and it's very hard to vinify it, to vinify it red. And then in Corvina you have rotundone, which is a molecule that imparts it a green peppercorns aroma. Okay, rotundone is also present in Schioppettino, so it's a pale ruby red with a watery edge, and on the nose a watery rim, and it's immediately fascinating, sexy on the nose, because you get immediately all the cherry in alcohol, but it's still not a Morello cherry. Now, if you allow it time to open up, you start getting toasting notes, grilled notes that are imparted by the 12 months of barrique. 2018 is ready for drinking after 2 years, and so the oxidative notes of the oak need to be there. And then you get dried fruit and also nuts, as well as plums. To the palate, it is really pleasant. It's not a wine that is easy and sexy, but it is a wine that goes well, that you can drink a lot of, and that goes well with porcini mushrooms and beef or veal. And it goes well also with a nice tagliata, a T-bone, and aged cheeses. Okay, I would like this tasting not to be a monologue on my side. You might ask me questions, even if uncomfortable. I would appreciate uncomfortable questions. Okay, the question was, is this ripasso made only from fresh grapes or also from dried grapes? Well, our approach is to maximize the elegance of the wine, and therefore we're only using Valpolicella wine to pass it on the skins. The Amarone, when it is drawn off, is not dry yet, and so you still have some residual sugar. In a different version, you can obtain dried grapes in the drying lofts, and when you pass the new wine on these skins, you can add more dried grapes, but that increases the alcohol content, which is a bit tricky because you already have a Valpolicella that has an average alcohol content of 13%, and that would bring it up to 15%. So it's easy to go off scale. So it's not the power of the wine that we're interested in, it's the elegance that we're interested in, and so we're not looking for more alcohol. The next wine is really the king of Valpolicella, our Amarone. It is an extraordinary wine. Okay, its ancestor is the Recioto. It is an evolution of Recioto. All the Italian viticultural areas have their sweet wine coming from the peasant tradition, because as the farmers of the past knew that high sugar content meant that the wine wouldn't turn into vinegar. So it was a wine that everybody could store and keep. Sweet wines like Vinsanto and also Passito di Pantelleria, Torcolato di Breganze, and then Recioto, white Recioto in Soave, and then the red Recioto. Now, Amarone is an evolution of Recioto because legend has it that a wine master forgot about a Recioto cask he had somewhere, and then when he went there, a nasty yeast had consumed all the sugars, and so the Recioto was fermented to dry. And the cellar manager, when called to judge about that cask, said, it's not just bitter, it is extra bitter in Italian, Amarone. and added, but it is delicious, and hence the success of Amarone. The rule book is changed every year to adjust the production of Amarone, not to disperse the big value and the profitability of the production of Amarone. 2016 was a wonderful vintage after a very hot year. As was 2015, the classic blend Corvina, Corvinone, Rondinella. Now, of these three varietals, Corvina is the one that you need to have for the aromas, the black pepper, the green pepper. Corvinone is what imparting substance to the master, while Rondinella is there for color. Now, if they are vinified separately, they don't make sense. They are unbalanced. That's why they're blended together. Well, it all depends on the producer, what markets they have to respond to, and what kind of style they have. Now, Corvina, for instance, when it's on its own, it's too rich in spice and too straightforward. I'm saying this, that the style we were looking for in our Amarone is this. We are really aiming at making it as elegant as possible. It is a wine that has a high alcohol content from the very start. As a technical person, it is my conviction that you need to develop its elegance and the characteristics of all the varietals that make it up by not starting the aging with too much oak. So we start aging in tonneaus, not barriques, 500 liters each. And these tonneaus are fourth or fifth pass. Then we put it in very big containers, 480 hectoliters. Now, all these indigenous varieties like these, you need to be patient because they will give their best, but only if you're patient enough to wait. Now, Amarone, now 2017 or 2018, when would you market it? It's all a matter of being patient and understanding what the varietal can potentially do and be ready to wait as much as it takes. Now, here it's a 2013. The grapes were beautiful when it was picked. This is a lot deeper in color than the Ripasso, but again, it is still pale enough to see your finger through. The alcohol is perceptible from the tears, which are very quick and very narrow, and the wine already looks thick. Now, when you smell an Amarone, you should take minutes to appreciate how it evolves on the nose. Because 5 years after the harvest, dried grapes, all the olfactory molecules are heavy, complex. They need oxygen to express themselves. So, should we use a decanter? No, use the right glass, because a decanter serves the purpose of decanting wine, not to oxygenate the wine. The alcohol will evaporate and create some form of alcohol barrier, so that the aromas will no longer be released and the oxygen will no longer be in contact with the wine. So it's the right glass. What you need is the right glass. So you get this Morello cherry, potentially in alcohol, as we preserve them in Italy, or as they are in the Moncherie by Ferrero, in the chocolates that contain cherries. Now, it's this complexity with this distillery hint as if it was grappa, because again, it's dried grapes that we're talking about, but always intertwined with the cherries. On the palate, it is still fresh. It is not cloying. You would expect something a lot more cumbersome on the nose. And contrary to that, it is very pleasant, and it would enjoy another 10 years of aging problem-free. And the sugar is as high as 6 grams per liter, but it's not overly sweet. It's a great job we're doing on the market, because recently the Amarone was thought to be a very dense, very thick wine with a lot of concentration, overly rich. Those were a few styles that were developed to please the market. In the latest Anteprima Amarone, the Amarone preview 2 years ago, something that happened before the pandemic. Now, there were people who were coming to Verona to taste Amarone, and I asked them the question, how many bottles of Amarone do you drink in a year? And the answer was an average 2 to 3. So we'd like it, on the contrary, to become a lot more accessible, not easy to drink, too easy to drink. We would like it to be more approachable, so that the least sophisticated consumers can appreciate it, and so that more bottles are consumed while not compromising on quality. Now, at this point, I can also detect some licorice, dried figs and prunes. It is not easy to pair with food. We're talking about stews of any kind, the stracotto, the brasato. It has a sweetish taste that could clash instead of integrate well with the food. It can work well on a T-bone steak. Perhaps it's too much. I think it's wonderful with goulash, which is rather spicy. And so the sweetness and the spice will sort of counterbalance each other. But because this wine changes in the glass, because it evolves, I regard it as a meditation, a contemplation wine. It is a wine for an evening with friends, so that it has time to evolve in the glass. And occasionally I would recommend it with dark chocolate, where the sweetness of cocoa would not be more than that of the wine, but this sweetness sort of blends well with the tannins, or with candied orange zests in chocolate, coated in chocolate, as if it was rum. So I recommend that you don't drink all the Amarone, just leave it on the side of your table, waiting for the end of the tasting. We needed to continue our journey. We're leaving Valpolicella and Verona. We're going through, we're driving through Lombardy, and our destination is Piedmont. The first part of Piedmont that we come across after the Oltrepo Pavese, it's the Monferrato in the province of Alessandria, a great viticultural region that has been forgotten because of the renown of Barolo, the Langhe and Alba. But it's a region that has suffered somewhat in the past, and in terms of market palatability. But it is a beautiful place that has incredible wines to offer. The gentle rolling hills of Monferrato has a lot to do with Siena's hills, while the Langhe is closer to the Chianti area. Bricco dei Guazzi is in the village of Olivola, north of Alessandria and Asti, and south of Casale Monferrato, in that triangle. Bricco is the hilltop. It's the hilltop overlooking the village of Olivola. When the sky is clear, when the weather is clear, you can see the entire range of the Maritime Alps, from Mount Viso to the Apennines and the sea. And to the south of this area is Nizza Monferrato. The soil is mixed depending on the slope. It's clay, marl, without crops of pure gypsum. The Bricco dei Guazzi winery had a great testimonial in 1975. Luigi Veronelli, then a journalist for the Epoca magazine, visited the estate. Here it is, and wrote on his notebook the name of the vineyards that were the best in his opinion. And so we can proudly say that all the vineyards of Bricco dei Guazzi are reported about by Veronelli. And there is a crew that Veronelli noted on his notebook called La Presidente, with a full south exposure. And it's the first wine that we're tasting. It's a blend, Merlot and Barbera. So it was our intention to combine in this wine the international and modern Piemontese spirit with the tradition of Piemonte. It's the same Barbera as we use for our Barbera d'Asti. It is a wine that wants to combine these two inspirations, and from the very color you can already guess how powerful it is. It is a deep, intense ruby red, where Merlot is dominating in the color over the purple hues of Barbera. This wine spends 12 months in a barrique. First it is blended and then it is aged, and then it spends another 6 months in the bottle. And on the nose you get all the pleasantness of Merlot with its contribution of red fruit. I get a lot of raspberry jam in particular. Now, on the palate, the sweetness that you would anticipate knowing it's Merlot is just washed away by the acidity of Barbera. So that calls for another sip, another glass, or for food. This is a wine that has an aging potential, at least 5 years, given the acidity imparted by the Barbera. Red meat, cow's cheese, better if sweet. And this is one of our best sellers, especially on export markets, because consumers abroad find this wine a lot more approachable than Barbera on its own. So here are the vineyards. For instance, this is La Mandola. It's another cru from which we produce our Alba Rossa. And here's the cellar. Now, I showed the various wineries in this tour, and I recommended that you go visit because it's beautiful places, they have stories to tell, and they contain some surprises. At Prico de Guazzi, we have one of the largest infernotes of the entire Monferrato, the infernot being a cellar that was dug in tufa underground. And this is the cellar that dates back to the late 18th century. We started out with an unusual wine, and we're going to finish off with another unusual wine, Alba Rossa. How many of you have ever tasted Alba Rossa? Two people. Now, Alba Rossa is a wonderful story. Alba Rossa is an indigenous varietal in every respect. And it is indigenous to Piemonte, but it is pretty recent. It was first created in 1938 thanks to Professor Dalmasso, who was a professor of agriculture and ampelography. Ampelography being the science that studies the phenology of vines in terms of leaves and bunches. Now, those years were years when people were researching a lot, so he thought he could combine the elegance of a Nebbiolo with the freshness and liveliness of a Barbera. So he crossed these two varietals through the seeds, creating a new varietal. So, okay, it's a cross. It's not a blend of different grapes. It's a new varietal created from two separate varietals. Now, the project was just put aside because the war broke out, and some people resumed the project at some point. It was found out, however, unfortunately, that the Nebbiolo in the crossing was the Nebbiolo di Dronero, in other words, not Nebbiolo but Chartreuse, and it would give a grape that would ripen late and tannins like Nebbiolo, and the acidity of Barbera as well as the color of Barbera. So while for Schioppettino vinified as a spumante is unique, in Piemonte there are other Alba Rossa producers, but we are the largest with our 7 hectares because in 2014 we decided to valorize this varietal because it is hard to work with. There are people who vinify it as if it were Nebbiolo, others a Barbera, others still will use it as a blend to improve it. So it is late and tannic as a Nebbiolo, fresh and acidic like a Barbera, and colorful like a Barbera. In this case, we have a wine of 15.5% alcohol. It is harvested late so that the tannins are ripe and the acidity of its Barbera component is lower. It is vinified as a standard red with long fermentations and long storage on the lees. It spends 12 months in barriques and 12 months in larger oak because the oxidation needs to be constant. First strong and then less strong because all the tannins need to blend together and evolve in the best possible way. Now you see the color. The color is deep, very deep ruby red, and you cannot see the finger behind the ball of your glass. And if you look at the tears, okay, if you have a white tablecloth, you can see the tears are colored, and that tells you about the color density, the color depth of this wine. So high acidity and high alcohol are the two characteristics that don't call for malolactic fermentation. These grapes are hard to manage in the vineyard and even more so in the winery. But once you tame this very difficult varietal, once you can harness all it has to give and put it in a bottle, well, you still have to be patient. This is 2018 and it's still very fresh. And it gives you a lot. Now, it's one of those powerful wines that it's a wow wine. Because it's like an explosion of fruit, a fruit that is already evolving, red berries, vanilla, grilled notes, cocoa, but with an underlying freshness. The nose is always fresh. It's never burdened by the alcohol. It's a wine that shouldn't be drunk when too warm, because if it's warmed up, the alcohol will take over. And it's a powerful wine to the palate without overdoing that. It's, of course, a wine for a brasato, a stracotto, a meat stew, beef stew. So, long-cooked meat will be sweetish, and therefore it will be well compensated by these very clear-cut tannins that are not, he's saying, dusty at all. And it's a wine for aging, because I'm increasingly convinced that Albarossa, if you vinify it in the right way, has a long aging potential. Very well. I think the timing is just right. I don't know if you have any questions. There are two questions from London. The first is, what's the residual sugar of Amarone? And then the other question is it possible to get the retail price in euro and or pounds of all the wines? Now, being a winemaker, I can answer the first question, and I can't answer the second question because I'm not sales. Now, Amarone is between 6 to 8 grams per liter, which is the residual sugar you obtain normally in Amarones of a certain level of quality. And I'll explain. Out of my personal experience, the longer the drying process, the longer the resting phase, the higher the quality. But the risk is that you obtain wines that are too high in alcohol. You see, even yeasts, when they get to 16% alcohol, they can no longer function. And also, it's too rich in alcohol. That's why we stop at 16, 16.5, and we still have 6 to 8% residual sugar. Residual sugar is another factor that we've extensively discussed, also at the consortio of the Amarone, because there was a tendency to have thicker wines with a residual sugar that was more comparable to passitos than with a wine that was meant for pairing with food. And also because having high alcohol contents with high sugar levels will truly make the wine cloying, and the cloying character will have and will affect the pleasure of drinking. Another question from London. How many hectares of Albarossa are planted in total in Piedmont? In total, 60, approximately. The most recent figures from the Chamber of Commerce of Alessandria tells us it's 56, so I think it must be around 60 currently. Okay, I'd like to thank you all for being so patient and showing interest in tasting these wines. I encourage you to visit our wineries, and especially you could buy them now and taste once again the Pinot Gris or Friulano of 2020. I'm lucky enough to work with all these wineries that are part of a single group called Gena Agricola. But I'm here to represent the work of everyone who worked at our wineries and in our estates, the wine masters and all the others. Now, you've used some time of your day to come and taste your wines. You would not have done the same if it had been fruit or tomato sauce. I'm not just trying to vilify the other products, I'm not playing the role down, but the wine has an ability to tell a richer story. It's not just the product in the glass. It is this tradition, the centuries that have layered one on top of the other in terms of experience and culture. And it's the work of the winemakers, the agronomists, who were able to valorize this. And it's beautiful because all the companies I told you about are being managed more and more by the younger generations. I'm 45, but I still feel as if I were 24. And it's this very positive momentum from the young generations that is propelling these wines and our ranges. We're thinking of new products. For Torre Rosazza next year, we'll be presenting blends, both red and white. For Costa Ente, we're vinifying an absolute novelty, which is Corvina Spumante. And for Piemonte, I told you that it's a very peculiar area with lots of different soils and outcrops of pure gypsum. Some people have thought of planting pure Pinot Noir, and it's the most difficult varietal to grow and vinify, but we've made a few attempts in 2019, and we'll release the product in the coming years. Now, these are the people who had planted it previously had planted it on the right soil, but in a cool area. So it wasn't regarded as a successful experiment. With climate change, it became just the perfect setting. The grapes are perfectly ripe at the right time with 13.5 potential alcohol, no sunburns, and the aromatics all contained in the bunch. So unless you have other questions, I would like to thank you again and see you next time.